Okay, so I've got 2:01 on my clock, so we'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Gavin McDonald, and I'm a partner at the law firm of Cox and Palmer here in Halifax, and I'm the new chair of the board for the Halifax Chamber of Commerce. And it's my pleasure today to welcome you all to Navigating COVID-19, a webinar with Laurie Cook from Chutzpah Consulting. Did I pronounce that right, Laurie?
Yes, you did.
There we
Great.
go. I got one thing right so far. So we're going to be talking about scenario planning today and how we as business people can use it to deal with uncertainty. We've all had to face the challenge of a lot of uncertainty in this year and in the past weeks. Looking ahead, with businesses beginning to reopen on June 5, there's going to be even more uncertainty to come. Organizations that want to move beyond the shock and day-to-day mindset of struggle related to COVID-19 are going to find this scenario planning a very useful tool. During Laurie's presentation, if you have a question, please type it into the Q&A box. Provided there's time, we're going to try to get through those questions at the end of the presentation. If you're commenting in the chat box, please address your message to panelists and all attendees so everyone can see your post. There's also an option in the message system to say it to all panelists, which only I and Laurie will be able to see. Now I'd like to introduce Laurie Cook, who is the founder of Chutzpah Consulting. Laurie is an expert in adult learning, leadership, and innovation. As such, she creates unique interactive learning experiences to help community organizations, business, and government go beyond the typical style of downloaded learning. She's also president of the Canadian Community Economic Development Network, which specializes in supporting the development of more inclusive, generative, and democratic economies. Laurie has a master's in adult education, specializing in community development from St. Francis Xavier University, and is also a new PhD student in educational studies with Acadia. One of Laurie's passions these days is figuring out how to do online learning differently. She'll probably have lots of suggestions for the chamber. Whether the topic is scenario planning, governance, team building, or leadership, Laurie is always looking for ways to help people think critically about what their situation is and to make sure the learning they are doing is directly relevant to their goals and aspirations. Thanks, Laurie, for joining us today, and welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. Okay. So I guess that's throwing me the ball, and I'll just get going here. One of the things I wanted to mention is you should be seeing on your screen, I'm sharing my screen, a Google Doc, which maybe is a little different for some of you compared to the typical webinar where slides are shared or there's a panel discussion or something. I've started using Google Docs as a very much more interactive way of doing learning online. So it's a bit of an experiment. I've done it a few times and been in a few myself and found it fairly useful. So hopefully this goes well, and I'd love to know your thoughts later on. You should know there's a link to the Google Doc in the chat. And if you just click on that, it should take you to your own version of the chat. But I also will be sharing my screen as we go along, and you'll be able to see where we are as we go along. So just to get going, the idea is that COVID-19 has definitely packed a punch for everyone. And in this interactive workshop, the idea is to learn how to use scenario planning to prepare for a future that's still very uncertain. Even as we start to reopen, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. And that's something we keep hearing from decision makers and policy makers and public health personnel. The idea here is to shift from being reactive, though, to being more proactive as we move forward. And I've already been introduced. So my name is Laurie Cook. And you can find out more about my company on my website, which will be at the end of this. I'm also guessing many of you are still feeling very overwhelmed these days, even though the initial shock you may be over, but there's still a lot of uncertainty. It's something I've been dealing with myself in my own business. So as we go forward, as was mentioned, a big part of my background is adult education. And so I do believe that not only I, but all of us have a lot to offer each other. And there's power in sharing those learnings with each other. So the idea of this Google Doc is also that it's an interactive workbook where you can share your thoughts and ideas and learnings and questions, and they will be captured in the document. And at the end, you can email myself through the website for chutzpahconsulting.ca, and we happily send you a copy of this workbook. And the other thing I just want to mention is the other reason I did this as workbook up as something that could be shared and that would be interactive is I'm really just going to take you through very quickly a process that you can use for scenario planning. And the idea is then you can go away and use it yourself when you have more time to reflect and think about the questions and use the workbook, but also that you can use it with more people in your organization. And even if you are a sole proprietorship or a business of one, I would encourage you to get a business bestie and go through the workbook for each other. Dialogue is a really critical part of learning. And if you can find someone to share this experience with, that's really powerful and will really help you as well. So I'm just seeing Sarah is noting she doesn't see the link in the chat. Kayla, so if you can just repost that, that's great, thank you. So also, if you would, like I said, like a copy of this workbook, just go to chutzpahconsulting.ca to contact us later, and we will happily send out a copy to you. So let's get going. The first thing we want to do, actually, is just, I'm going to get you to just go in where the bullet point is and just follow my example there. And just put your name in, who you are, your organization, and what is your greatest challenge right now. So I'll just give you a minute or so for a few of you to put your names in and your organization. And what is your greatest challenge right now? Or something, what's really worrying you and keeping you up at night? And I see Melissa from Sport Nova Scotia is typing in, that's great. And she's saying, figuring out how to help stakeholders navigate and plan for the future. Yeah, that's a big one. And it's a really, this is a tough situation these days because you have to figure out what to do in the short term, very, very short term in terms of health issues, in terms of opening, cash flow, all sorts of different things. And yet at the same time, you need to be looking ahead to the possibilities of the future. And not just one likely possibility, but many potential possibilities. So this is a real challenge for people. And this tool that we're going to be going through today is specifically designed to help with exactly that situation. And I'll talk a bit more in another minute or so about where scenario planning came from, what it was originally used for, and how we can adapt it and use it for what we need right now. So I also see Sharon, thank you, typing in longer term for the next wave of COVID-19. So we are prepared and can thrive. I'm just curious, Sharon, what organization you're with, if you have a chance to put that in. Province of Nova Scotia. Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, and the other thing about this tool is I think that it's really an important, useful tool for whether you're talking about nonprofits and community organizations, whether you're talking about business, big or small business, whether you're talking about government, of course. Everyone's kind of in the same boat, and there's been a lot going on. And this is a tool as well that you can use more than once. In fact, I would highly encourage using it, using it as a tool, developing a base and then some scenarios and then checking in and reviewing it on an ongoing basis, and seeing how things may be shifting. And I'm just seeing also Sarah from CBCL and Patty David from the Celtic Music Interpretive Center. And someone's noting, oh, Loretta, if you can just start typing down below instead of in the box, that would be great. And the great thing about these Google Docs is you can easily change something. Also, if something goes wrong or disappears, then we'll figure it out from there. And I see Andrew from RDA, TNL, communication. So I'm assuming, Andrew, you're saying communication is really important right now, which I would agree with. And also Patty is noting that cash flow planning is really important. And again, Sarah saying trying to keep communication going as the situation changes. So that's great. I'm going to start to move on to the next section, but feel free to continue to put your name and organization and your challenge in the Google Doc. And we may come back and review later on, but I'm going to start to move on, and there will be more interactive pieces as we go along. So just to review or answer the most basic question of what is scenario planning? And scenario planning, it basically is a tool designed to help bring a very fuzzy future into focus by identifying a set of possibilities that could happen depending in the future on a variety of factors. So it's something we do unconsciously anyway, but finding a way to do it more intentionally and with other people can really help us to see things we might not otherwise think of in a more casual way or by ourselves. The method combines fairly certain facts about the future, such as demographics, usually, and others, with key driving forces identified by looking at social, technological, economic, environmental, and political, or steep trends. So I'm guessing many of you are familiar with environmental scans like PEST or SWOT or SOAR. This is very similar, but it's actually a little bit more comprehensive even. It was originally developed for use in the military, and then it crossed over into the business world. And generally it was used for long-term planning. Given the farther out one looked, the more difficult it was to plan because of higher levels of uncertainty. And Shell was actually one of the organizations that first pioneered these techniques, bringing them over from the military into the business world. So normally it was for very, very long-term planning, given that things could change a lot in the long term. What I'm doing here is taking the ideas of the technique and modifying them for a COVID-19 short-term, medium-term, long-term approach, but a much more shorter timeline than we're used to using this tool for. Also, you'll find there's lots of information online, either through Google or through YouTube or whatever, about scenario planning. But what I've done here is taken that information and tried to distill it down into a very simple approach that anyone can pick up and use, and also that anyone can pick up and use with other people. So the idea is that after considering a variety of possible scenarios and the driving forces involved in each, planners then also develop a variety of courses of action or strategies they could use to deal with different situations. So that's just the gist of what scenario planning is about. Now we're going to move into some exercises, and I'm going to go over some questions that you can use and think about to help you actually do scenario planning. So given what you know of what's been happening related to COVID-19, I want you to think for a bit what you think the steep trends are that are important for your organization to be watching. And so I've got a grid down here, and you can think in terms of short term being, I would say right now, about 2 to 4 weeks. Things can change that much depending on what happens in the public health situation, various funding support programs, all that kind of stuff. In the medium term, think of it as 2 to 4 months right now. And in the long term, 6 to 18 months or longer. So focusing on this chart then that I've got here, and feel free to put your cursor in any one of those boxes and to start typing if you have some ideas. But on the left here, we have steep trends. So we have the social, technological, which definitely has played a role in recent times, the economic, environmental, and political. And then we have the short term, which is 2 to 4 weeks, the medium term, thinking 2 to 4 months out, related to that trend, and longer term, 6 to 18 months in terms of that trend. So feel free to just type a few thoughts in those boxes if you have any ideas, thinking about the trends that would probably be really important for your organization to be thinking about. So I see we have fear of travelers. Someone's typing in. And there's also, so that's under social for sure. Technological, I mean, definitely Zoom and other video platforms, very helpful. But people are actually experiencing Zoom fatigue, which is new because they're on so many calls. So that's definitely something in the short term is a trend, but also it's probably going to be something that's big in the medium term and long term as well. And I see someone has mentioned the idea of expanding social bubbles. Yep, in the next 2 to 4 months. So we're up to, supposed to be just 2 bubbles, I think, at the moment. But I know people are expanding a bit faster than that in terms of their bubbles. So it's going to be interesting to see in the next 2 to 3 weeks what the public health results tell us of how well we're doing. I think we all know we're not going to be able to just return to normal, given the situation. It's going to be like an accordion is the way I think of it. So we're probably going to, you know, reopen and expand and go back to, try to go back to normal somewhat, but there'll still be some constrictions. And then every 2 to 3 weeks, we'll be waiting to hear if things are changing in terms of public health and if numbers are increasing or changing in terms of the number of cases. And obviously we're not going to eliminate it, but the big thing is, can we stay within capacity within the healthcare system? And just thinking about other things, there's so many people who have worked so hard doing things, getting things up and running, adjusting quickly to COVID-19. And it's, a lot of people are going to be very tired, I would think, and mental health is going to be a big issue, I think, as well. So I'm just going to check out what's showing up in the chart here for a moment. So we've got expand social bubbles, comfort level of participants returning to activities. There's some fear, some anxiety. You may be allowed to open your shop, but are people really ready to shop and try on clothes or do different things? That's another question that's still uncertain. New responsibilities on volunteers, certainly. Unemployment levels could be a real issue, especially in terms of economic recovery. Buy and local movement is really becoming a powerful tool. And just figuring out how to live with COVID, obviously. We need to maintain public spaces and surfaces. We also need to get haircuts, I'm sure many of us. I know I have one scheduled for Friday I've been looking forward to. And then politically, ongoing funding, the hope of some kind of ongoing funding. A lot of these programs, of course, are short term. And how are we actually going to sustain support over a longer period of time is definitely a big question. So feel free to keep typing in that chart, and I'm just going to move along to the next little bit and keep going. Anything you type in, obviously, this is going to be shared as well within the document. So I think it's very helpful because it's a way of developing a shared body of knowledge around this and thoughts. But you can see how you would work with it with the group. Okay. So the next thing to think about is what are the possible realities given some of these steep trends that we've just been talking about. And to help get going on that, I'm also sharing a brainstorming tool with you called a fishbone diagram. And this is usually used a little differently, but I think it could be useful in the scenario planning situation as well. It usually is used to look at the root causes of a problem. So you put something in the problem, the fish head, and then you work backwards. But the idea here really is to, just gonna bring this up one. The idea really is to put something that you're thinking about that is an issue or a factor related to COVID-19. And then look at the ripple, the fish bones more so as a means of putting down all the things that could happen because of that issue. So for instance, if people are afraid to go shopping for 6 months, say, or 4 months or 2 months, what are the implications of that problem, of that factor or that issue? And so building out all the different possible scenarios related to that factor or that issue is the idea here in using this fishbone diagram. So really giving you a sense, you could also think of it in terms of ripples, right? So you've got a factor or a problem or something in the center, a driving force, and then thinking about all the potential ripples, the possible realities of what could happen because of that factor or that issue. So I just thought this might be a helpful way to brainstorm that out, just repurpose this tool a little bit. Okay. So then the next question after you've done the fishbone diagram a little bit is to think about how these trends could affect how you pursue your purpose or your business. So I'm speaking here, I know the Chamber has both nonprofit community members as well as business members. So for the nonprofit community organizations, really thinking about what your purpose is, being very clear on your purpose, reviewing your purpose. Is it still relevant? Does it need to change because of COVID-19? Same thing for a business, is actually thinking about what your value proposition is, what your purpose is, what goods and services and things you're trying to offer, what problems are you trying to solve, and thinking about all the ripple effects, the fish bones that need to be considered for different factors related to your business or your organization. And same thing for government, would have a similar process. So then, do you think your purpose, goods or services, are still relevant, as I mentioned, or do you think they need to change? Have you thought deeply about your purpose or business model recently? And this is something very difficult to do. A lot of people probably had to think very quickly. in the last few months, and just, you know, it's been a reactive, more of a reactive kind of process. So you have a crisis come up, you have to deal with that crisis, another crisis comes up, you know, there's fires all over the place. You're trying to stay on top of government programs, who's offering what kind of support, what works for you, being involved in advocacy in order to make sure that your sector, your organizations are represented and their voices are heard. The voices of people that you serve are heard and their needs taken care of. So that's a lot going on. But what I'm inviting you to do is to try and find time to really take stock, to really stop for a moment and think critically about what you have been doing, and not what you were doing in the past, what you've been doing since COVID-19 hit, and then what really makes sense, what's relevant going forward, and what's most important as well. What are your priorities? If you have limited resources, what can you actually do? Also, some businesses are already starting to close, and it's sad to see, but not everybody is necessarily going to make it through this. And to realize that having a certain business may not be the same as your life purpose. So if you are going through some kind of difficult situation like that, really taking the time to think about what your life purpose might be and how that could help inform how you move forward next. And talking that over with people who care about you, and who can offer a mirror to help you figure that stuff out. So a really good resource for this, if you have a bit of time to read, or if you like watching YouTube, there's tons of videos by Simon Sinek on YouTube that start with his book, Start With Why, and also his other books, all great resources to check out if you're doing that kind of deep thinking. So just to keep moving, again, the idea here too is to think about, based on all those things we've just talked about, what are you most worried about? What's keeping you up at night? And what's really important in terms of priorities? And then as you figure out those things that you're most worried about, the idea in the scenario planning technique is to start to narrow down on 2 or 3 that you're really going to focus on. So this is why I have another chart here with the steep trends on the left. And again, the idea of what you're most worried about, and just 1 or 2 things, and then working across the chart. Okay, given what I'm most worried about, what do I need to be doing? What short-term strategies can I come up with that could address a couple of different scenarios related to that thing that I'm most worried about? Same thing, the medium term and the long term. And definitely feel free to just jump in there and start typing some stuff. We'll spend a moment here. And I see someone's already typing 80% drop in tourists, which tourism is huge for so many places, but Nova Scotia is no exception. That's a really critical issue. And yeah, it's cry a lot in the short term, I think is a fair thing to say might be happening. But hopefully with time and with support of employees, like I really encourage organizations to include current employees, former employees, potential future employees in helping you to figure these things out. So it's not all on you. Really try and find support to help you through this time. Mental health is a big thing for me, so I'm always very conscious of the need for people to look after their mental health and make sure they're well and get the resources you need if you need them. So invite locals in, redesign services, awesome idea. Okay, does anyone else have any other thoughts on this chart before we move on? So this is a way to help you narrow down a couple of the things that are most urgent for you to focus on and to start to develop strategies on how you're going to cope with those different realities, those different possible scenarios. And the idea is that you would fill out this chart, and then given what you see, think about what stands out the most for you. Another question is, what kind of changes do you think you might have to make to adapt to various scenarios? And the idea here is not to negate the difficulty of the problem or the challenge here, but to, if anything, recognize it, put it on paper, and then start to work through it in a very methodical way. And then what skills or resources you think you will need in your organization going forward. So what sort of thing could actually help you? Myself, I invited a young person to come on board as an intern. That person is taking some courses on my behalf in e-commerce and marketing, being offered through the chamber actually. And I can't afford right now 40 hours a week or 40 hours to do one of these courses, but to have a young person benefit from that learning and then bring learning back to me that's most relevant for my business. That was a great way for me to access the learning that I needed, but to do it in a way that worked for me with everything else that I have to deal with. So thinking about those skills or resources you need in your organization going forward, and I would strongly suggest involving young people is a great possibility. There's a number of government programs to support the hiring of young people. We have almost 550,000 new graduates in Canada that have graduated this year. And a lot of them have lost their employment prospects. So figuring out a way to help our young people and to attach with them and to support them, but also have them support us and give us learnings, and definitely usually a lot more comfortable with technology. So the whole going online thing and figuring that out, they're extremely helpful and useful for that. So I encourage you to check those out. And then the last question, as I mentioned, sort of similar, do you have those skills or resources in-house? And if not, how could you get access to those skills or resources to help you move forward? So really thinking through, so these questions more towards the end are really more action oriented in terms of what specifically you could do to help you make that shift that you need to do. And other than that, I'm just gonna, I understand we have some time then for some questions. But I'll just go through a bit of a closing and thank you, and then open it up to whatever Gavin and Kayla have to move forward. So I just want to thank you for participating, everyone, and sharing your knowledge and learning. And if you would like to know more about scenario planning or other techniques that could be helpful for you, you can check out the resources section on our website. You can sign up for updates about other events and things we're doing online. If you would like some custom support to help you through this process, you can also check out our website. And we have a special offer for custom coaching sessions where we're willing to help you get going using scenario planning if you need some help with your organization, and to help you shift from feeling overwhelmed to being more in control of what's happening around you. So I'd encourage you to contact us now and get on the wait list for that. And you also then would get a special discount of 20%. And just a reminder again too, if you would like a copy of this workbook, please feel free to contact us through our website and we'll send a copy to you. So you can learn more at chutzpahconsulting.ca. And at this point, we'll just open up for questions.
Sure. Laurie, maybe I'll get things started while people are probably typing in the Q&A box. Invite people to put their questions in Q&A so we see them, or address them to all panelists in the chat box. But I was wondering if you could speak to, within an organization, who should be involved, who should you bring into the discussion when you're doing scenario planning? And maybe if you could answer in sort of two contexts. One is sort of a smaller organization, and then maybe expand on it in like a larger organization, either a larger business or like a government agency or something. Sort of talk about it in those two contexts.
Yeah, sure. I always lean to, I believe diversity is a real strength. And so I always lean to the more people you can include in different ways, the stronger your plan will be, whether it's strategic planning, scenario planning, whatever it is you're doing. But I definitely, in a smaller organization, it would probably be easier. You might want to start with your leadership team and then do another session with people, employees or clients and so on, a more open, bigger session. And then look at what would be interesting is actually seeing what the leadership team comes up with and what other people that you're involving, other stakeholders and so on, and see how the two compare, and see how well the leadership team is aware of the other issues, and also though how well the rest of your employees and clientele and so on are aware of what the leadership team is aware of. So you could do it as one big whole group, but you could also break it up into smaller groups and do it that way. And then it's interesting to compare and contrast the results that you get. For a larger organization, similar sort of approach, actually. I would think about how to break up into groups. You don't have to have everybody do it all at once. There could be some things you could do by survey, to have people answer some specific questions in preparation for a more live in-person, and by in-person I mean in-person online type of event. And if you have people in both those situations, if you have people who have some skills in facilitation or hosting conversations, that could be very helpful to have them take this workbook and figure out how they would use it in different groups.
Right. Yeah, the new norm, which is virtually in person. Yeah. I get, just to pick up on something you mentioned there, this is my first experience with scenario planning, but I've been involved in a lot of strategic planning processes in the past. If you were to sort of do a Cole's notes or sort of, how we should organize our thinking about those two types of processes, how would you do that?
Yeah, well, strategic planning is often, 2, 3, max 5 years. I would say in recent years when I used to do a lot of strategic planning, and I've moved away from it actually a lot because I just found things were changing too fast. And so you do a big strategic plan and then something would shift. So it was more on that longer term planning. I mean, not 10 to 20 years like a scenario planning was originally developed for, but definitely, 2 to 5 years. And 2 to 5 years, 2 years now even is ridiculous to try and plan for, right? Like there's just so many unknowns and so much is uncertain. So I think scenario planning, it's ironic that it was a tool that was developed for very long-term planning and uncertainty in the long-term situations. And it's actually now, though, a very, very useful tool it was designed for high levels of uncertainty. So if you think about it that way, then the idea of using it for very, very short-term or even medium-term or longer-term planning now is very useful. It's ironic, but to me, it was just like something that I remembered, and I was thinking about what could be useful at this time for people, and given what people are going through, and this popped up, and I thought, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Almost something more tactical than strategic, if you were to try to do an opposite. We actually have a question in the question box, and it's a request if you could sort of walk through maybe a fishbone example.
Yep. So I'll just go back to the fishbone diagram here, and yeah, the example would be so Marcia, I'm going to involve you in this, and feel free to type in to the Q&A or the chat or somebody else. Thinking about an example. So actually, I see a question to do with the QE2 Foundation, and the question is, where will my fundraising program be when all is said and done? And so that's a very interesting one, and something a lot of nonprofits are dealing with, but also businesses in terms of revenue. So let's say the problem is, I don't know what's going to happen with fundraising. What am I going to do for fundraising or for bringing in revenue? And then think about that as the factor. That's the problem, the issue that you're dealing with. And then think about the ripple effects. So I guess even more specifically, the problem for fundraising would be what's going to change with fundraising, right? Or fundraising in person is not going to be happening as much, right? Like a lot of nonprofit organizations and community organizations rely on events. So that's where you want to get really specific with the problem. So the problem is not just fundraising, but it's specifically, we can't do live events for probably at least 18 months to 2 years, maybe even longer. And then look at the fishbones as what would be the ripple effects of that? What are the different types of impacts as a result of that problem? So, for instance, if you can't do fundraising long-term for a very long time in person using events, what other things, and then as you figure out the ripple effects. So we can't, I know, for instance, our Lions here do a big event every year that's like a dinner, and it's a give away a free trip, and you pack your bag, and at the end of the night, you literally, if you win the trip, you hop on a plane and you go somewhere, right? So that's not going to be happening for at least 2 or 3 years. So how else can they replace, find another way to fundraise and bring in that revenue? So thinking about all the ripple effects of that problem. And then by doing that, then what you can do is look at, okay, what would be another way that we can address that impact? So for instance, online fundraising was already a big thing before COVID even hit. And I would say now it's probably one of your key areas that you should be looking at is online fundraising. So whether it's crowd fundraising or online auctions, or anything that you can think of online. So I hope that helped, Marcia.
Okay, I'm going to jump in with another question that we worked up. Is if you're going to start this process with your organization, are there any pitfalls or any things that people should look out for that can lead to the process not working from your experience, that they should be aware of or should be on the lookout for?
I think the biggest thing is if you're looking at other resources, don't get too caught up in the very specific technical aspects that had been used in scenario planning in the past. It can get overwhelming if you start to really try and do this very perfectly or something. Gavin, you had a great quote about perfection, and I can't remember what it was now.
Yeah, Don't make perfect the enemy of good.
Exactly. Yeah. And some other
I'm a
people have
lawyer. I live by that.
there you go. And some people have an acronym GMO. So GEMO, good enough, move on. So don't let perfection be the enemy of what you're trying to do. And definitely reach out. I'm happy to chat anytime if people want to go deeper with this. I would say the other thing that could be a problem is a lack of facilitation skills if you're dealing with a larger group. So having someone who has skills who can actually bring people together and host a conversation would be very helpful, especially for a larger group. But also if you're on your own or in a smaller group, you know, doing this at least with one other person and going through it a couple of times and also practicing it even with other people, and getting their inputs. And you'll get, as you practice this, you'll get more comfortable with the process and thinking it through, and maybe even finding ways to improve on what I've offered here today, which I would love to hear any improvements. But definitely, you know, practicing is great. Having someone with facilitation skills is really helpful, but also don't get too hung up on trying to make it perfect.
Okay. It's one of those things that I seem to recall somebody saying something along the lines of, you know, while many businesses don't complete their strategic plans, um, if they have one, they do better or something like that. Like it's not, it's sometimes the activity of planning just makes you a better organization, even if you don't do exactly what was planned for.
Yeah, and you don't have to do the whole thing, right? Like maybe start with just the very, very short term if you're feeling like you're really under pressure and you're finding it hard to find the mental space to think more broadly about things. Deal with what you got to deal with, and then when you've dealt with that, you know, then look at the next level out. You know, like if 2 to 4 weeks is all you can think of right now, and all the scenarios or the strategies you can deal with right now, do that. And then when things settle a little bit again, maybe reach out a little further, you know, and try and think 2 to 4 months down the road. And then beyond that, you know, 6 to 18 months, which is so bizarre. We used to do planning, like you said, strategic
3 to
planning
5
for many
years.
organizations. And it was like 2 years to 5 years, usually minimum. And now we're talking like 2 to 5 weeks. But that's until we have a vaccine and until we know exactly how things are going to change. This is the new normal, right? And also, I'd encourage people, though, to think about, too, ways that they could build back better and stronger. Think about new ways of doing things. And, like, it could be including your employees and helping you to keep this business going. You know, looking at worker cooperatives and other forms of collective enterprise. This is a time, I think, that's really important for us all to come together. And also for those of us who maybe are feeling on their own, like they're really carrying the weight of the organization, the business, the world on their shoulders, you don't have to. Please reach out to somebody, anybody, and just, you know, have a conversation and share what you're feeling. I think that's really critical.
Yeah. What's that old saying about a problem shared or a burden shared is, never mind. We've had enough.
You're on the right track.
We've had enough aphorisms for this afternoon, but
Yeah.
I guess sort of picking up on something you said there, where, you know, you take your plan, you know, you do your planning exercise with whatever group, and then you know, you go back to it and you kind of you know, sort of work it. Given the short, sort of the more short term world we're dealing with, and any advice you might have on when you're at that sort of good enough move on phase, because a lot of people who are involved in leadership tend to be very demanding people of themselves, and so in my experience they might keep working at something when, you know, probably, you know, the, how to put it, the incremental benefit maybe not there anymore. So any advice you've got on that?
Yeah, I think you raise a really critical point, and that is to think about the law of diminishing returns, right? Like, at what point is whatever you're doing, is it actually contributing positively to where you're looking to go or how you're looking to deal with things? The other thing, and again, I would reiterate for those of us in leadership positions, to not feel like we're in this alone, like we have to have all the answers, because I would say we need the exact opposite mindset. If anything, we need to be reaching out. We need to be asking other people around us, stakeholders, employees, customers, volunteers, clients, and including finding ways to use the power of the crowd to solve all the problems. No one person is going to have the answers to all the stuff that we're dealing with right now. So that I think is really critical. And also for leaders to, I'd encourage them to, and it's not all about one answer to things either. It's about creating a culture of innovation and caring that is there then for the long term as we move through this, because we're not going to, it's not like you do a planning exercise and then you're done. We're going to need to be constantly planning, constantly evaluating, constantly looking at different scenarios, different possibilities, different strategies, different tactics. And so it's a highly chaotic, emergent situation. And the way you do innovation in that kind of environment is very different than what we've been used to thinking of. So there's going to be a learning curve. I think the biggest thing too is just for people to really care about each other, that leadership, and I'm a big Simon Sinek fan, so I'm very keen on his work recently and a lot of what he's been talking about recently, that leadership is about looking after the people you're working with. And if you can look after, you know, a person on either side of you, one or two people, and then they look after one or two people, and then they look after one or two people, it sort of distributes the leadership so that you really have a sense of shared leadership and shared responsibility in what you're trying to do. And I think that's a very important concept as well.
Yeah, I would echo your comments on a lot of his work. Now you'll correct me. I should have prepared this ahead of time, but I think didn't he write a book, you know, Leaders Eat Last?
Yes.
Yes. That was a really, you know, that was excellent. So I echo your comment about a lot of his thinking.
Yeah, and his most recent one is an infinite mindset. And you can get it on Audible. You can listen to it while you're doing whatever you get. If you got young children and you're trying to deal with them, and you put the earbuds in, and there you go.
Okay, well, we're coming up to, we're almost out of time, so we're just going to wrap it up here. Thanks, Laurie, for walking us through this scenario planning. It's a valuable tool, and you know, something I think a lot of organizations can benefit from. I want to thank all the participants for joining us this afternoon. The Chamber is hosting webinars every week with experts in a variety of fields to help with the various problems that businesses and organizations are facing right now. I invite everyone to head over to halifaxchamber.com/events for our lineup. We're doing lots of virtual in-person, as said earlier. And this webinar has been recorded and will be available to all attendees shortly through our website and the Chamber's YouTube channel. You'll also be getting an email from Kayla at the Chamber asking you for your feedback. We really appreciate the gift of feedback from all of you regarding our events to help us shape future content and make sure that we're giving good value to our members. So look for that survey and let us know what you think. And once again, thanks for joining us. Bye, Laurie.
Bye.